Hello, my name is Lynette Earle and this presentation is about developing program objectives. I am a secondary teacher who teaches Spanish. The objectives that the Ministry of Education set out for each subject area are one of the most important aspects of my job, and thus, the reason I chose this topic. It is also an aspect to teaching that some teachers, facilitators, or organizers overlook or do not spend enough time with reviewing and understanding.
Hello again, this is the real me, and in today's presentation on developing program objectives, the learning outcomes are: students will be able to understand what outcomes, objectives, and goals are, differentiate the difference between learning and operational, measurable and non-measurable, and intended and unintended objectives, and develop learning objectives. So let's first look at what objectives and their misunderstood but equally important word friends actually are. When formulating the objectives for a program, clearly defining the outcomes, which are often abstract ideas, are central to being able to articulate properly the objectives. The outcomes are essentially the end result of the program. However, sometimes understanding what the outcome means or how it will be measured is vague or not clear. I see outcomes as being more student-centered because they indicate to the learner what it is they will know or be able to do at the end of the program. However, because outcomes are vague or general, for example, students will be able to read and write in Spanish, specific program objectives are also outlined for a more teacher-centered approach that is more specific and state criterion. Even though I see these as being teacher-centered, this does not mean that they cannot be written in a way that is student-friendly so that they too understand what they will be able to do by the end. Program objectives, often confused with program goals, provide clear statements of the anticipated results to be achieved in the program. These objectives are important because they provide a foundation for instructional plans, guidelines for developing transfer of learning plans, and benchmarks against which programs are evaluated. Learning objectives center on the individual participant within the larger program objectives. Program goals are broad statements of purpose or intent for the program. The goal explains why a program is worth doing or why you are doing a certain outcome. Program goals are often part of a mission statement. According to Tammy Sowerby, she believes that goals focus on why we should learn and objectives focus on what we should learn. Both Jennifer Brown and Brittany Hockey mention the fact that the way program goals, purposes, or objectives are stated depends on the audience to whom the information is stated. Carolina Palacios furthered this comment by stating that different stakeholders have different interests. If all or the majority of stakeholders have been involved in determining the needs and these are being translated into program and learning objectives, this process might continue down a cooperative democratic path. However, if some stakeholders have exerted more power in the process, their interests may end up being the ones reflected in what the program and learning objectives are and how they are stated. The interactive planning model explains that there are two types of objectives when program planning. The first is the most common or well-known learning objectives. These objectives focus on change in individual participants, the organization as a whole, and the community, which assist planners in developing and or revising program objectives. The program objectives outline how staff will improve the quality of program resources and other basic operational aspects of the program. In Tyler's Basic Principles of Curriculum and Instruction, one of his main questions for which he bases his programming model is what educational purposes or objectives should the organization seek to attain. According to Tyler, stating the educational objectives focuses on behavioral changes desired in learners, and the content of those objectives specifies the domain of that desired behavior. This brings us to the second type of objective, the program or operational objective. This type of objective is related to improving the program operations, such as having adequate physical facilities, equipment, revenue, and training. In a simplified version, I see learning objectives as learning how to ride the bike, whereas the operational objectives are the learning about what you need in order to ride the bike. The activity versus the gear. the text lays out a very clear exhibit of what the differences are between program objectives that focus on participant learning and program objectives that focus on program operations. See page 158 if you're interested. Teaching point of view, I feel that learning objectives are more important than operational objectives because I believe the learning can be adjusted according to the facility, the equipment available, or the revenue, for example. To me, operational objectives are the tools in which I will use to teach. However, there are cases, such as with my own program plan that I am creating with Martin Armstrong, where the operational objectives, especially those related to the facility and equipment, are very important, as a computer lab with functioning computers equipped with Google Chrome are required in order for the learning objectives to be met. I would conclude that the importance of one type of objective over the other depends greatly on the desired learning outcome. Since I believe learning objectives are more important, let's dive down a little bit deeper. Learning objectives are divided into 5 major categories. 1. The acquisition of knowledge, such as knowing or understanding what something is and its basic principles. 2. The enhancement of cognitive skills, such as analyzing and translating your new knowledge into your own lives and using it in a practical application. 3. The development of psychomotor skills, such as demonstrating that you can physically do something. 4. The strengthening of problem-solving and finding capabilities, such as explaining how your new skills have augmented or reinforced your problem-finding or solving abilities, and how this will apply to learning in your own lives. And 5. Changes in attitudes, values, beliefs, and/or feelings, just such as reflecting upon and sharing your knowledge and skills and how it may have changed you in some way. These categories represent the different types of learning outcomes you can create, each having a different purpose. So why are learning objectives important? Caffarella points out 4 major reasons for us of why they're useful. Learning objectives provide 1. A focus and consistency for the design of instruction. 2. Guidelines for choosing course content and instructional methods. 3. A basis for evaluation of what participants have learned. And 4. A direction for learners to help them organize their own learning. It is most important to remember that learning objectives should be stated clearly enough to indicate to everyone exactly what is intended. Thus, there are also 5 general rules for communicating objectives clearly and correctly. 1. Avoid unfamiliar words. 2. Do not confuse or misuse words. 3. Be concise. 4. Seek simplicity. And 5. Review what has been proposed to make sure the objectives say what you want them to say. Learning objectives are important to many people, such as to the student themselves and to the teacher. In university courses, Tammy Sowerby uses objectives to study for exams. She commented that objectives help her focus her learning in courses that can be filled with copious amounts of very specific information, making the course content manageable. Stephanie Shantz thinks learning objectives are important in determining and focusing the learning activities. They are the concrete goals against which we can measure whether participants learned what they must know, and they are important in determining how we will move participants from point A to point B in their learning. Being able to be flexible and adapt to the needs of the group, which may not always be congruent with the often predetermined learning objectives, is important. However, Carolina Palacios questioned that if progress in learning is more important than mastery, and we are not aiming for people to do X, Y, and Z, and rather that they improve, then do we need objectives? Do they matter at all? Are they relevant to know where you are going even if you don't get all the way there? To answer Carolina's questions, I believe that we do need objectives whether the learner attains them or not, because you still need to start somewhere and structure a program in some way. Being flexible just means that you are able to account for both the intended and unintended objectives. Constructing program objectives. It should be understood that not all objectives are measurable and that not all are necessarily intended. Some benefits to a program may not be foreseen. So in constructing program objectives, it is important to state both measurable and non-measurable objectives, and to be flexible in renegotiating and reshaping those objectives so that the unanticipated but important achievements and outcomes of the program are highlighted. It is also important to include other people, such as program participants, work supervisors, and external stakeholders to help in developing and or reviewing the objectives that you create. Some places of work, such as the school I work at, have a professional development planning committee that is made up of staff from various parts of the school, such as administrators, teaching staff, clerical staff, etc. Houle suggests that objectives should be essentially rational and thus impose a logical pattern on the educational program, are practical and concrete, and are discriminative. Objectives are often negotiated and reworked throughout the life of a program as well. Sometimes during a program, certain objectives may need to be eliminated, revised, and are added to a program as the situation warrants, and should be done through careful reflection. Writing learning objectives. When writing learning objectives, there's a handy formula that you can use when creating them. Start with an opening statement, the who, then choose an action verb, the how, and then add the content reference, the what, leaving you with an example such as, the learner will describe the 5 major categories of learning outcomes. Of course, as Caffarella mentions, there are other authors who have suggested 2 additional components. The conditions under which the learning is to be demonstrated, such as without the use of any reference materials, and the standards or criteria for acceptable performance, such as with no mistakes, leaving you with the longer, more precise example of the learner will describe the 5 major categories of learning outcomes without the use of any reference materials with no mistakes. I find this format clear and easy to use, similar to the SMART goal concept. This format with the additional components is like that of Mager's objective format, which is very precise because you need to state the condition under which you expect the behavior to occur, the terminal behavior you wish to see, and the criterion for acceptable of achievement. However, it is important to remember that there are certain kinds of learning outcomes that do not lend themselves to precise behavioral or performance criteria, such as in situations where creativity, confidence, sensitivity, feelings, attitudes, and values are the focus of the learning activity. So this concludes my presentation on developing program objectives. I hope that you now, or better, understand what outcomes, objectives, and goals are, can differentiate the difference between learning and operational, measurable and non-measurable, and intended and unintended objectives, and can develop your own learning objectives. In the thread provided in our course discussion area under presentation section, along with this link, is a list of questions that correspond to this presentation and a list of references used for this presentation. Thank you and hasta la vista!